Hello again, everybody, and welcome to CaneSport's Inside the Lines. Gary Ferman here, along with Matt Shodell, and a lot to talk about, a lot of things going on in the world of the Miami Hurricanes. And I know a lot of fans out there, Matt, are priming for a CaneSport live show tonight because they're just overflowing with emotions and opinions and everything else. But I thought we'd go the simpler approach here and just attack some of these developments ourselves for right now and sort of knock it out a little bit. And let's start with the defensive coaching staff that was finalized today by Manny Diaz, and some moves there. I don't think it's the seismic blow up that a lot of fans were looking for, but I'm not sure that was really reality. And we'll talk a little bit about that here. Let me start by just going back to the beginning, and Manny Diaz as a football coach. Before he got the Miami head coaching position, he had been a defensive coordinator for, I think it was about 16, 17 years in college. Actually, I think it was 18 years actually in college football. And he has developed his defensive system. So it's unrealistic for a guy like that who finally becomes a head coach to do anything but introduce his defensive system to, and in this case, he didn't have to introduce it because he had already been defensive coordinator here at Miami. So he's going to run with what got him here, and that's going to be his defensive system. So when he takes over the head coaching job, he hires Blake Baker from Louisiana Tech, who was familiar with his defense. He had worked under Manny at Louisiana Tech. Blake was a Manny protege, so to speak, and that's why he was hired, because of his familiarity with Manny Diaz defense. Yeah, they've had some ups and downs the first couple years. There's no doubt about it. But I just never felt that it was reality to think that Manny Diaz was going to fire Blake Baker, turn him into a scapegoat, and go try to hire a defensive coordinator that he was going to turn the entire defense over to and just sit back and be a CEO head coach. I never expected it to happen. We never had an indication that it would happen. Your thoughts on just the overall concept of Manny Diaz and the defense?
Yeah, well, I think the thing with Manny Diaz that fans aren't used to, and I think I'm still adjusting to it also, is in the past, we've seen coaches that are just like immovable objects, right? Al Golden was never going to get rid of Mark D'Onofrio, even if Mark D'Onofrio set an NCAA record by giving up 8,000 yards a game, whatever. He wasn't going anywhere. What I think we're seeing with Manny Diaz is he has his ears to the ground. Previous coaches have said, we don't care about the outside noise. We don't listen to the outside noise. Manny Diaz is smart enough to realize these past coaches have gotten fired because of the outside noise, right? And hey, maybe the outside noise isn't always wrong, right?
No, absolutely not.
Yeah, so you saw last year he made a lot of offseason changes that made people happy, brought in Ed Reed to sort of head things up as a figurehead, even though I'm not sure Ed Reed did a heck of a lot, but perception-wise, it took a lot of the heat off Manny. He did a lot of other things, bringing in transfers, things like that made people on the outside very happy. This offseason, it was all, get rid of Mike Rumpf and do this and do that, and we need more cornerbacks. So he's addressing a lot of that. The one thing he hasn't done that fans want is get rid of Blake Baker. And to alleviate some of that, the statement today is that Manny Diaz will call the defense, which, is not going to be the case. He called it as much as this year, he's going to call it as much as next year. It's the same defense, like you said. He and Blake Baker are one and the same. They run the same defense. It's not like, oh my gosh, Manny Diaz is going to be calling everything. It's going to be so different. No. What Manny Diaz realizes that maybe fans don't is the personnel on defense was not good this year. You and I have talked about this. Great, you're bringing Jalen Phillips. Great, you're bringing Quincy Roche. Well, guess what? It's because the other players weren't good enough. Linebackers weren't good enough. The secondary, even the safeties weren't good enough. You bring in Bubba Bolden. Your best three players on defense are transfers. The existing roster isn't good enough. The recruiting isn't good enough. That remains the case. What Manny Diaz is doing is buying himself some time, sort of like a politician would do, like his dad would do, right? You sort of mellow out the outside noise and then get back to what you think you have to do on the inside to fix the program. I don't think, today adding Jess Simpson and DVD is going to do a heck of a lot. I think they're both going to be excellent. I think DVD is a great recruiter and a real rising star in that area. He has to learn how to coach the cornerbacks, and he's a fast learner. I know he'll pick it up quickly. Jess Simpson has been here. He's done fine. Is he this big name guy who's like coached at a million different programs. No, but he's got a little bit of NFL experience, a former high school guy. He can work the recruiting ranks. And, Todd Stroud, it's not like it's going to be that hard to, to sort of fill those shoes. Todd Stroud had some health issues and nice guy, but he was originally not supposed to be a coach anyway. So this is not like a big deal for people who are upset on the defensive line that they didn't get a big name guy or something like that. This is fine, And the defensive back coaching situation, I think, is an upgrade with T-Rob and DVD over what they had last year. I know Banda was a great recruiter, but again, he didn't really cut his teeth coaching at these great programs. And Rumpf isn't a great recruiter, and he is a great coach, in my opinion. I think he did make average cornerbacks into very good cornerbacks, but you got to be both in college. So I personally think the moves that Manny's making will mollify the fan base and give him a chance to try and get things going before next season. But again, like I was telling someone today, they need to win some games. They need to win some big games. I mean, if that doesn't happen next year, you're starting to wear out your welcome big time, and fans will start to see through all the politics of it, where you're sort of trying to fix stuff and make fans happy when they say, oh, you got to, get rid of Mike Rumpf. Okay, fine. We got rid of Mike Rumpf. Oh, you got to, get better cornerbacks in the transfer portal. Okay, we got a couple of better cornerbacks in the transfer portal. But at some point, if you're not winning the games, fans will start bringing it on Manny and saying the guy can't coach. He can't win the big game. And that's when you can't fix it at that point, right? Because now it's get rid of Manny. So nobody's gone to that point yet. Manny's got to win this year, in my opinion. He's got to do it right, and he's got to, Alabama's losing everybody. Miami's bringing pretty much everyone back that they want to or that they were expecting to. So this is your chance. Play close with Alabama. Maybe a miracle happens at the end, right? But this is your chance. You got to start next year with a good game, not a blowout loss like what happened at Clemson, or the entire season will go south fast with all the outside noise coming on Manny now, not coming on Mike Rumpf and on Blake Baker. So they've got to be real aware of that. I'm sure Manny knows that. And he's trying to make the steps in the right direction this offseason.
Well, you mentioned the word noise at least 3, 4, 5 times there. And let's be honest, the noise in Miami is a big deal with this job. It's why being the head coach of the University of Miami is such a difficult position in college football. It's not for the faint of heart. I don't think it's for a first-time head coach. It has, it's too difficult. But that's where we are here. And, we've gone through 2 years of Manny. First year was an absolute disaster. He clearly was in over his head and everything was spinning for him. But you got to give him just an absolute world of credit for the way he bounced back. I thought he made a lot of progress in year 2, but you're still sitting here going into year 3 with the University of Miami not being close to winning anything in college football. Let's be honest. They're not close to winning the conference title. They're not close to making the playoff. They were relevant at the beginning of the season only because nobody was playing. And they got a couple game days out of it. And I thought that was phenomenal for the program to get that exposure early in the season. But, got blown out at Clemson, not a surprise. I thought it was good that they played Clemson because I think it's important that they have a good understanding of where they are. An absolute embarrassment against North Carolina. And then, of course, the bowl game loss to Oklahoma State where they had the, just horrible first half. So, but here's the thing. If Manny Diaz's defensive system is not good enough for this program, then Manny Diaz shouldn't be the head coach. Okay, that's number one. And I know, everybody always wants to fire everybody or whatever. But, so you can't sit here and think that Manny is now going to go and hire Kevin Steele and say to Kevin Steele, come in here and redo the defense, and I'm going to sit back and sip pina coladas and get a suntan every day, like out on the practice field. Not reality. I mean, Manny spends every minute of practice on the defensive practice field working with Blake Baker and the other coaches in building the defense, putting together a game plan, and then they go out on game day. And Blake Baker's been the guy calling it in the headsets and stuff to this point. But they're all in tandem with each other on what's going to be called in every situation before they even show up at the stadium. So who's making the calls is all semantics. I think Manny is trying to quiet the fan base. He knows that fans are not happy with the fact that he's not firing Blake Baker. Everybody wanted blood. But I just think there's some basic tenets here that people should understand about what's going on in the program and just the dynamics of the coaching staff. And I don't think hiring somebody from the outside to be defensive coordinator was ever reality. Your top defensive coordinators, why would a top shelf defensive coordinator who has his pick of the litter of jobs every single year come to Miami to work under Manny Diaz, who he thinks he's better than, because he's a top shelf defensive coordinator. And Manny has not been a top shelf defensive coordinator. Manny has been a good defensive coordinator at times in his career, but he's been basically a middle of the road defensive coordinator in college football. Nick Saban's not hiring him to be defensive coordinator. Let's put it that way. And that's not a knock on Manny. Manny is what Manny is. And, I've been trying to say that to everybody too for 2 years. Like, don't blame Manny if at times he's a little bit like a fish out of water here, because it was asking a lot to give him this head coaching job. And he's working his way through it. The guy's trying like hell to be successful and make it better. But it's going to be within the framework of what he has to deal with. And if his defense isn't good enough and his schemes aren't good enough that he and Blake Baker are running, then, maybe that's just a statement of, what might be reality in that this might be a job that's a little big for him at this stage of his career. But we'll find that out here in the next year or two. I think he's getting a fair shake. He's getting an opportunity to build the roster and hire his coaches. Look how many coaches he's replaced in the first 2 years. That's not the greatest sign in the world either. But so let's talk about these moves, because these are reality. And let's start with the defensive line, Matt. And, Jess Simpson coming back in the program. I had heard a few weeks back that Jess had approached Manny and said, hey, I think I would like to come back if the opportunity presents itself. I guess, word had started to filter. Maybe Todd Stroud wasn't going to coach the D-line anymore. And Jess reached out to Manny and made himself available for that job. And Manny decided to pull the trigger here this week. Your thoughts on Jess Simpson and what he brings to the defensive side of the football?
Yeah, he's been here before. I think he's a good coach. When he first came to Miami, he was briefly with the Falcons, not in a coaching role really, but more a helping out role. And he was a very well-respected high school coach in Georgia, won a lot of championships there. So I think it's a nice combination of helping recruit Georgia, where he still has a tremendous reputation, get Georgia kids down here, and he's a good coach. To me, it's a good situation for Miami. I'm not sure he was Manny Diaz's first choice, but like you said, it's not exactly the kind of job a major defensive line coach who wants to, have input in play calls and move his way up to defensive coordinator eventually is going to necessarily want to take. With what you said also, again, it's not Manny Diaz's defense that I think is the problem. I'm a big believer that you can put great players in any style of defense and they're going to do pretty well. They just don't have the players. And the really good defensive coordinators mask the problems you have on your defense. If you have those 2 or 3 weak areas or weak players, position players, you can sort of mask them if you're a great defensive coordinator. Manny Diaz's defense tends to leave a lot of these guys sort of on an island or on their own, or he trusts, players to be able to hold their own downfield. If it's Gil Frierson running with a tight end, or if it's, DJ Ivey running one-on-one down the field with a speedy receiver, he tends to trust those guys. So if, this is all hypothetical, but if the defense does go south again this year, I think the pressure would certainly be on Manny to become a head coach and do what a head coach does, which is, Blake James, we need to spend the money and get a high-level defensive coordinator in the building. I'm going to tell him he has the reins. To me, this is the year. Either this works or it doesn't. And if it doesn't, the pressure is going to be so intense on Blake Baker and Manny Diaz that's what's going to have to happen if Manny Diaz is going to still be the guy. So this really is a pivotal season for Manny. Got to win a big game. Got to win, in my opinion, win the ACC Coastal, assuming there is an ACC Coastal to win. That's not just one giant conference again, but that's what he has to do. That's what fans expect. And it's time, he's.
But let me just play devil's advocate for a minute, because we watched Randy Shannon go through this. Okay, Randy Shannon.
Totally different animal. Randy's
well, it is. But wait a minute. Randy Shannon got this job, and he was a national championship defensive coordinator. Okay. And he tried to be a CEO head coach, and he went through, I think it was 3 coordinators in 4 years, and nothing really panned out. Bill Young was okay for 1 year, but it never really panned out. And Randy Shannon went down the tubes as a head coach at the University of Miami, never running his own defense. And that's what got him the job. And I always thought, man, maybe that was a mistake. Maybe Randy should have run the defense himself. And so now you got Manny coming in, and look, if Manny's not getting the job because he's a good defensive coordinator, then why is he getting the job? So he's making the opposite decision that Randy Shannon made, and he's running his own defense. And he's either going to succeed or fail based on how it does. And I don't have a problem with that. Do I think it's been good enough year 1 or 2? No, I don't think it's been good enough year 1 or 2. But I always felt that I never felt that it was the perfect storm. When he came in as defensive coordinator, he came in because he was going to bring an attacking 4-3 defense that the fan base wanted, everybody wanted. It suits Florida players, and that's what they're going to run at Miami. But there have always been games through the years like this, that like we saw against North Carolina, where the system didn't hold up. It's what got him fired at Texas when he had a horrible game against BYU, and Mac Brown, sent them home. So I'm not sure what the expectation should be, but I guess that's a separate issue. But Jess Simpson, I think, is a good hire. He's a very solid defensive line coach. I'm concerned that he doesn't upgrade recruiting, and I think that we'll talk about T-Rob here in a minute, who obviously clearly on the surface should upgrade recruiting, except he's replacing Ephraim Banda, who was the best recruiter. And it's been my feeling that the program needs better recruiting top to bottom. And Jeff Simpson, I think, is an adequate recruiter. He did show a capability to go into New York and get Jason Blissett and Jared Harrison-Hunty, Jared looks like he might turn out to be a decent player. We'll see. He flashed a little bit this year. But at this point, I wouldn't say those were blockbuster signings. They were solid signings. We'll see how those kids develop. But I'm not sure that Jess just takes recruiting, through the roof, or suddenly now Miami's going to be in the game against the SEC schools recruiting the top defensive linemen in the country. Hopefully it plays out that way, but it didn't on the first iteration of Jess Simpson. So, we'll see. But he's a solid defensive line coach. Certainly will be as good or better than Todd Stroud. And you won't see any drop-off in the on-field product with Jess Simpson. All right, let's talk T-Rob. Okay, he's the celebrity hire of the year, without a doubt. Travaris Robinson, a guy who has had a reputation for many years now as being one of the better recruiters in college football. Just has a good vibe about him. Very good communicator, gets along well with kids, gets along well with parents. And it's going to be interesting to see how they use T-Rob. Do they use T-Rob primarily as their recruiter in Dade County, the way Banda was, and have him taking layups? Because that's what a lot of these kids in Dade County are, is layups. A Leonard Taylor in a normal year wouldn't have been a layup. James Williams would not have been a layup in a normal year, but this was not a normal year for obvious reasons. So strategically, how do you use T-Rob? Do you have him recruit Dade County, Matt? Or do you send them out there and let them slug it out with the big boys and try to get some better players in the program? That's what I do.
Well, I don't expect them to treat T-Rob any different than their other coaches. They get assigned certain areas around the country. That's their primary school. At the end of the day, T-Rob's not recruiting offensive players. He's not recruiting linebackers. He's not recruiting defensive linemen. That's not his job. What he'll do is he'll go to whatever his area is. He'll help identify those players. He'll get his foot in the door. So when those position coaches come in, they recruit those kids. No defensive lineman is signing with Miami because T-Rob's recruiting him. So T-Rob's job is to come into around the country and try to find the best defensive backs and come to Miami. That's going to be his primary job.
If that's all they do with him, Matt, in my opinion, they're wasting his talent. And I know that they've fallen into this trap here of the cornerbacks coach recruits cornerbacks, the safeties coach recruits safeties, the tight ends coach recruits tight ends. To me, they got to get out of that. You got a couple really good recruiters on the staff. You've got Steve Field and you got T-Rob. You got to let them recruit outside their positions.
Listen, I talk to these recruits all the time. they want to talk to their position coach. I'm sorry. I mean, that's just the way it is. They could love T-Rob to death, but they want to talk to their position coach and have that bond. That's who these kids want to be bonded with. T-Rob's great. He's going to recruit the heck out of things, and he's going to get the foot in the door and sell these position coaches like crazy. That's great. And he will do it nationally at the programs they sign him to. But at the end of the day, the other coaches have to produce, whether it's, Jeff Simpson or Jonathan Packey or Manny Diaz at linebacker or whatever or Blake Baker rather at linebacker. I mean, those are the guys that have to close the deal. And if it's an offensive coach, they have to close the deal. A kid can love T-Rob to death, but at the end of the day, the kid's going to have other programs saying, okay, so you love Miami and T-Rob's your main recruiter, but you do know he's not going to be with you at all at practice, right? That doesn't sound good for Miami to try to land a top 5-star or 4-star kid that every other program wants. It doesn't work. So you have to be smart with T-Rob. You can't just try to have him spend an immeasurable amount of time, doing things like that. To me, if he can bring in the top defensive backs that Miami targets in the country, he's done his job. And if he gets his foot in the door for other coaches with top prospects on the country, and in Miami-Dade and Broward and Palm Beach, he's done his job. You don't overextend him. You do what you do with the other coaches. He does it better than any of the other coaches in the nation. He's made a reputation for that. But that's what he's good at. He's not good at, I'm going to get you guys a 5-star offensive tackle, and I'm the primary recruiter for that offensive tackle. It doesn't work.
Well, this is how they've been doing it here for many years. The way, and you and I disagree a little bit on this, which is kind of good. It makes the show a little more interesting. I just feel like if they're going to take the next step in recruiting, they got to get their best recruiters involved with the best players. And, T-Rob sitting in the office at the Hecht, worried about recruiting. Let's say he was recruiting this year and he was recruiting Cam Kinchins and James Williams, and that's all he's doing. It's a waste of talent. The guy is a special recruiter. I don't want to just personally see him recruiting the best safeties. I would like to see him recruiting maybe the best defensive players across the board. And if he's helping Jess Simpson recruit a defensive tackle from Georgia or North Carolina or New York or somewhere, or the northern part of the state of Florida, or wherever it is, I personally don't see any harm in that if he's the lead recruiter for a kid like that. And then he brings Jess Simpson in as a second recruiter in those situations. Miami has got to improve its recruiting. And I think that they're not going to be able to do it without getting outside the box, stop pigeonholing themselves the way they are. You've got certain coaches that are better recruiters than others. It's now pretty well established. The best recruiters on this staff are Steve Field on offense and T-Rob on defense. The other coaches are I think okay recruiters. Rob Likens, Rhett Lashley. I think Hickson's okay, but I don't know that Hickson is going to go out to another state and beat Alabama for an elite running back. You know what I'm saying? It takes a special recruiter to be able to do that. And T-Rob is a proven special recruiter. And I'd like to see, Manny get outside the box and use him creatively. You don't need T-Rob taking layups. That would be my opinion. All right, DVD. We've known him forever. We knew him when he was a player. The nicest guy you'll ever meet in your life. Can't say enough great things about DVD. He played the game. He was a great player. He's been waiting for his opportunity to be a coach, and Manny's giving it to him. And I think it's great because he should be a good recruiter as well. He's going to have to develop as a recruiter. He hasn't done home visits, things like that. But I think it's the right time for DVD to get this opportunity. He can learn under T-Rob. He's the cornerbacks coach. T-Rob's going to be the safeties coach per se, but really you could have used T-Rob as an overall kind of defensive backs coach, bringing DVD along, and they can work together with the defensive backs in general. I think it's a great move, giving DVD a shot.
Yeah, I agree. Fans, I've seen mixed opinions on it on the boards, but this tells you everything you need to know. If you believe that Manny Diaz knows college football coaching, and you have to think he does at this point, DVD is going to a different program with Banda. That was all the reports. That's what we'd heard. And Manny Diaz said, we cannot lose DVD from this program. He's too important. He's been a great recruiter. He has an NFL pedigree. He played in the NFL. He's going to be a good coach down the road. great coach down the road potentially. Whatever Manny Diaz saw on DVD, and he sees him every day in that office, he said, we can't lose this guy, and he made him an offer that he couldn't refuse. To me, that's enough. I mean, if you trust your head coach who's been doing this for a while, has been a defensive coordinator at major programs, obviously, and has had success doing it, and he says, this is the guy we can't lose, who are we to argue, right? So I think fans should give DVD the benefit of the doubt for the ones that are doubting him. I think he's personally going to be a very successful coach.
All right, on the message boards, we're always having arguments about coaching, player development, recruiting, talent. I've always come down on the side that the recruiting's not good enough, and until the recruiting gets better, you can't start to judge the other two things. And not everybody agrees with me, and that's fine and good. But they got to have better players. And the thing that's concerning is, all right, so last year they brought in they had the transfers, and I think the transfers saved what might have been a disaster. Let's be honest. It was an 8-win team with De'Ara King, Quincy Roche, Jalen Phillips, Bubba Bolden, Jared Williams, Jose Borregales. I'm not sure it would have been better than a 4- or 5-win team without those guys. And, so it showed what better talent can mean. And we talked about the recruiting here, but now let's talk about this year's transfer pickups so far. And, let's start with Charleston Rambo, the receiver from Oklahoma. Now, the minute I heard transfer receiver, Matt, I grimaced a little bit. It's like I'm concerned that as you keep bringing in these transfers every year, that it's affecting the development of the younger players on the roster. And if they're not good enough to develop, my question is, why are they being recruited? It's like scholarships should be valuable commodities. And if you're going to recruit a Dazzle Morsham from Alabama, or a Jeremiah Payton, or a Keyshawn Smith, and bring them here from San Diego, if they're not good enough to be frontline players in the program, why are they being recruited in the first place? So now we go and we're getting Rambo from Oklahoma, who's a very good player. He's coming here to be a starter. Let's be honest. Mike Harley, after the year he had last year, is going to be a starter. So now you're down to one starting position. You've got 10 other guys sitting there in that receiver room to fight for for a starter's reps, which is, I love competition. But think about how many of these guys are not going to get to play very much next year with a room this crowded. And so when I first heard they're taking a transfer receiver, I grimaced. I'm like, does that mean that all these guys that have been recruited still aren't good enough? And look, Wiggins, Pope, they disappointed this year. They got their opportunity and they just weren't consistent enough and weren't proven enough. And I think those are two guys that are going to suffer next year in terms of reps. But Rambo, Matt, is a really good receiver and certainly as good or better than the guys they have. And he's going to start next year. So talk a little bit about your opinion on the transfer situation, bringing in a transfer receiver, the crowded nature of that room.
Well, I mean, normally I'm not a fan of transfers. It means you're not recruiting well enough. But in the current situation, with the anticipation that the NCAA is going to have to vastly expand the rosters after giving everyone an extra year of eligibility, I actually don't mind Miami taking even 10 transfers this year. I mean, they're going to have 57 freshmen on their team at some point. You don't need that many young players. You got to balance the roster. And you know what? If you have 2 receivers that were starting that weren't that good, bring in 2 transfer receivers. You have 2 cornerbacks that weren't that good, bring in 2 transfer cornerbacks who can start. Because when the NCAA eventually moves that roster up, probably after this year where their seniors are a free spot, it's probably going to be 100 spots, however they want to count it, allowed on a roster, if not more. And if you lose some, grad senior transfers or some, redshirt junior transfers, whatever, it's not going to matter because you don't want a roster with 100 people on it. Because now the kids aren't happy and they're not getting playing time. With 85, it's almost too much. Miami's been playing at 77, 78, 79 roster players, and there's players not happy that want to leave because they're not playing. So it's not a great locker room dynamic. So only because of this crazy situation, I'm actually a big fan of taking transfers across the board. And I think Manny Diaz is realizing that too. And that's why you see him taking, you wouldn't say, like you said, you wouldn't say, oh, we need a wide receiver transfer, right? Because Mark Pope and D. Wiggins should be better. They weren't terrible. They weren't good. But Mike Harley was good enough. So, yeah, I think any top player at any position where they say this kid will make us better and we'll start, I think they're going to take him. So,
well, on the flip side of what I said, if you're Rhett Lashley and Rob Likens and you're sitting back and you're looking at this, what happened this year, it wasn't good. Like the receiver play wasn't good enough. I mean, Harley took a big step forward. Pope and Wiggins did not. And the young guys, we've been all, begging to see more Keyshawn Smith. I mean, every time they put him on the field, it seems like you notice he's out there. He's, he still's not making huge plays all the time, but he's on the field. Some of the catches have been out of bounds, things like that. We're aware he's out there, and he's a kid that shows some potential. But Likens and Lashley are sitting back there, and they're not here to mess around, man. It's like they're here to make this thing happen. They're here to advance themselves in their coaching careers. They're not looking to take 4 or 5 years and build the Miami offense. They want to win now. They want to put numbers up now. They want to be one of the best offensive units in college football. So, they're looking at it and they're saying our receiver play wasn't good enough, and they have a chance to pick up Rambo, and they're going and getting them. So maybe the truth's in the middle. Maybe the getting Rambo is a great move, which it probably is. And maybe they need to recruit better at receiver. And when they're taking kids, and hopefully Brinson coming in this year as a kid like that. You got Jacoby George, who's a good looking young receiver. Hopefully these kids start developing a little quicker and a little better to where you eventually don't need to go out and get transfers, because you've got the standard recruits in your program that are those level players. And so hopefully maybe the ultimate solution is kind of in the middle of that. But I think they upgraded at receiver by taking Rambo. So it's all good in that regard. I had the same kind of feeling with the transfer of DeAndre Johnson, the defensive end from Tennessee. He's an okay player. If you look at his grades through his time at Tennessee, he's okay. I mean, I would probably classify him on face value as a rotation guy. I don't think he'll be as good as Quincy Roche was this year. He certainly won't be as good as Jalen Phillips was this year. But he'll be in the rotation, and he'll be a guy. But my question remains the same. What about Jafari Harvey? What about Chance Williams? What about Cam Williams? What about the guys that you've been recruiting the last few years to be frontline defensive ends here? And if they're not as good as Quincy Roche, if they're not as good as Jalen Phillips, then again, to me, your recruiting is not good enough. So you're having to go into the transfer portal once more to try to get a guy that can help you. And Matt, I just think it comes back to the same debate.
Yeah, I mean, it does come back to the same debate in the sense that, again, it doesn't hurt to take transfers in the current situation. So, yeah, does he excite me tremendously? No. I mean, I think I was more excited about Roche and certainly about Phillips when they got them. But again, this kid sort of was being used at a position as Miami would use him. Tennessee playing a lot of linebacker. When he did rush the passer, he was pretty good. So, he can get a handful of sacks, 5, 6, 7 sacks. You're to your point of the guys they have not being good enough, I mean, this year we didn't get to go to practices. We couldn't really see what they were being coached or how they were developing it in person. But what speaks volumes is what you see on the field when they do play, and then the moves coaches make depth chart wise. And if you go back to receiver, remember they opened up the receiver competition. They made 9 players, co-first teamers, stayed the same starters the whole season. Didn't matter. That was the midway point of the season. There was never a change in the starting lineup. And at defensive line, nobody, they basically got a chance to see what their defensive ends would look like without Phillips and Roche in the bowl game. And obviously they didn't really like what they saw, because they just immediately brought in a transfer who, is, like you said, not a guy who's going to excite you, but he's an older guy. He's played a bit. And that tells you all you need to know at defensive end. Defensive tackle, I sort of chuckle when Nesta Silvera and John Ford announced they're coming back. Where were they going to go exactly? Go work somewhere, because they weren't playing in the NFL. So, but it's good that they're back. They needed those 2 guys back. It would have been a ridiculous decision for them to leave. I would prefer these guys don't make this big deal like, oh, we're coming back. We're not going to the NFL. It's sort of silly. Some guys Mike Harley, you could maybe see it. Even that's borderline.
Well, especially when you lose the last 2 games the way they did.
Yeah, but above a bowl, I get it. The Reverend Jordans of the world, of course you have to announce. The Tyrique King, of course. But, I mean, what's next? Like a backup defensive lineman to announce he's coming back? I mean, it's a little silly. But, again, they didn't think the defensive ends were good enough. They're bringing in a transfer. It wouldn't shock me if they even bring in a defensive tackle transfer if they can get a great one. They need it.
I would.
The team got run over like crazy at times this year. So we'll see what happens.
All right, another place where recruiting has not been good enough and they need help is cornerback. And the next transfer that we think is going to hit is Tyrique Stevenson. I love this one. He played a lot of football up at Georgia. Probably would have been Georgia's top cornerback coming back this year with Tyson Campbell going into the NFL. Georgia certainly did not want to lose Tyrique. And I guess he just decided he wanted to be closer to home, goes into the portal, and we think any day he's going to commit to Miami. Your thoughts on the Tyrique Stevenson potential pickup?
Yeah, I think the story is he wants to be closer to home, but I think in reality he was not happy with what Georgia did to him because from what I heard, he was promised he'd start at cornerback in year 1. Then he was promised to start at cornerback in year 2, and neither happened. They were using him all over the field. They used him at safety. They even used him at linebacker at times. Started him a few games here and there. So now when they're saying you're a top cornerback coming back, you're going to definitely start, what are you going to believe? So it's great for Miami that Georgia mishandled him that way. I do expect him to be a Miami Hurricane, whether he announces that in the next few days or just shows up on campus for the first day of classes, I don't know. But yeah, I mean, obviously they desperately need him. He's a physical corner. There is some, talk out there, he doesn't have the hips to really be a great corner and this and that. What Miami has at corner, he'll play corner like he wants to and he'll be fine compared to these other guys. I'm not worried about it, Most people think he'll probably want to have a safety in the NFL. Why does he want to be a cornerback? That I can't tell you, but he's dead set he wants to be a cornerback. He's going to be a cornerback at Miami because they don't need safeties. They need corners. Big upgrade.
He walks on. I don't care what he wants to be. He walks on campus. He's the best cornerback on the team.
Right,
so
right.
He's got to play cornerback, no doubt. All right, let's talk for a minute about the one that left. Because he deserves it, and that's N'Kosi Perry. Interesting up and down. Few years here at Miami. I think he made the right decision. I think it was, even though he had a decent, bowl game outing, I think the writing's on the wall. The future of Miami football at quarterback did not really involve N'Kosi Perry. So, you happy, sad, see N'Kosi go? What do you think?
I mean, for N'Kosi, I just wish he'd left a year earlier just because I think it would have been better for him. I don't know why he stuck around this year. He said how much he loved Miami. But look, if he wants to be in the NFL, it didn't make sense. He knew he wasn't going to be the starter. So I still don't quite understand that. He never really addressed it. But he'll have to learn a new offense somewhere else and compete there. Certainly for Miami, it would have been nice to have him back, an experienced backup. You saw how much progress he made in last year's offense in that bowl game. I was shocked how good he looked. I thought when he came in, oh boy, I figured he wouldn't have prepared sufficiently. Probably see him overthrowing guys like he did or underthrowing guys like he used to or getting harried in the pocket and going out too quickly and not keeping his eyes down the field and just launching bomb after bomb after bomb like he used to do. He looked poised, calm, collected. He was on point with his throws. He looked excellent. And it's a shame that he left only because of, Tyrique King having the ACL. And I know Miami has put out a release before his surgery saying he's going to be back for the season. I mean, everyone I've talked to said that is a ridiculous statement to make. I mean, you can't ever say how long a guy's going to be out before an ACL surgery. And even after the surgery, there can be setbacks, But now with the surgery done, I have heard that he's ahead of schedule, whatever that means. They're hoping June or July, which would be great, and that makes not having N'Kosi Perry a lot better. I know fans want to see Tyler Van Dyke be the starter even if N'Kosi was back, but I mean, you don't put Tyler Van Dyke in game 1 against Alabama and expect, the offense to look great. That's just not going to happen. Even Alabama's second team defense is going to probably be better than what Miami's first team defense was this year. So it would have been nice to have N'Kosi as a backup plan, but you got to hope for the best for him. He did stand by Miami probably a year longer than he should have, and I hope Miami fans would wish the best for him.
All right, and the last topic I thought we should touch on today is early entries. And, this is the time the kids that can get in are are coming in and enrolling in school and getting into the weight program and participating in spring practice. Hopefully there will be spring practice. I think it's, very much up in the air, to be honest. I mean, when you see how much COVID is still flying around, I don't know if they'll want to go through it in terms of spring practice. We'll see. But, the bottom line is it's a good thing when kids can come in and work and be part of the program 9 months before they're going to be on the field, theoretically. And there were some disappointments there this year. There were about 5 kids or so that thought they were going to get in that, for whatever reason, didn't get the proper classes taken, didn't get the proper credits, and now they're not going to be in the program until May, June, something along those lines. How big of a deal do you think that is, Matt?
Look, it's always a big deal, for a kid who wants to play early to get in early. I mean, just it's almost a necessity in today's college football. But again, with the higher, roster limit, with the seniors all able to return and all that, it's not maybe as big a deal for the program itself. And look, I think, I just was on my screen looking it up. There's only 8 kids right now coming in early. And the Florida kids are still waiting on their standardized Florida, I think it's called the FSA. There's some standardized Florida test. The score hasn't even come back yet. It's been delayed because of the COVID issues and personnel issues at the state level. And, I was talking to Jacoby George today. He's like, listen, I got all my classes done. Like, I'm ready to enroll, but I need the FSA. I can't enroll at Miami without it, and I still haven't gotten it back. So, it's lucky for these kids. Miami usually has started classes, a little earlier in the past than they are this year. I think the 26th, somewhere in the last week of the month is when they're starting. And normally they'd be starting around now. So that gives these kids another couple of weeks and then another week after that before the final add drop date to get enrolled. So I don't think it'll be a problem for the Florida kids that haven't got the FSAs back. But it's something to keep an eye on. And, it's tough for these kids that tried to graduate early. You mentioned a handful that didn't make it in. Several of them, they were just one English credit shy. But again, guidance counselors aren't always there. I talked to some people around, like at Miami Northwestern. I talked to the athletic director. He said, listen, it's not University of Miami's fault. Like, these kids, most of them, to graduate early, you've got to plan it by your freshman or sophomore years. It's just too much. Like, to get everything done in a 1 or 2 year period is virtually impossible. I mean, trying to do all these, taking 3 English classes at a time, like, that's not going to work. So, it's a tough situation for kids that came very close to being able to do it. And I'm sure they're frustrated. Getting them on campus early is great, but you saw this year, like the freshman receivers didn't play. There were some freshmen that certainly helped out in the secondary because of problems there with like Al Blades going, obviously having that unfortunate situation and some injuries here and there, or targeting calls more likely with Amari Carter getting, Brian Ballivan games. But really, this year's freshman class, aside from running back where they had to play, like if there wasn't a depth issue where there just was no one there, you weren't seeing those guys getting a ton of reps. And I think that's going to be the case again next year. So these kids will have that whole next season to really learn, aside from the James Williams and, the guys who are just like obviously super talented to the point where they're going to be on the field. Other than those guys, I think it's nice that they'll have that full season next year to really work out in that 5 a.m. workout group and get stronger, bigger, faster with an eye on the following season.
All right, Matt, I think we've, covered just about all these issues that have come up the last week, and man, a lot to talk about for the middle of January. But I think that Manny's doing some good things. I mean, he's not doing everything that everybody wants him to do, and I think it's unfortunate that there's been such a long laundry list through his last, his first 2 off seasons as a head coach, and it's a challenge for him. It's going to continue to be a challenge. This is an uphill battle that he's fighting for many different reasons. But I think he's given it his best shot, and it'll either be good enough or not good enough. And I think the next year or 2 will obviously determine that. So for now, he's Matt Shodell. I'm Gary Ferman. We hope you've enjoyed this edition of CaneSport's Inside the Lines, and we'll see everybody next time.